Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Be the Good podcast. I have with us here today Monique Kelley. Monique, how are you?
I'm doing great, Christy. Thanks so much for having me on.
It is my pleasure to have you here today. So let's start with you graduated from BU, and then not long after that, you began working in the pharma industry doing PR in relation to oncology and neurology. Can you tell us about that time after graduation and how you were led to that role in PR initially?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crazy looking back because I failed biology. When I was at BU, I desperately wanted to go into nutrition, but the pre-med biology course really was the obstacle for me that I just couldn't get past. And so after I graduated with a degree in communication and PR, I ended up going into New York for an investor relations firm called Brainerd, working in their media relations department. This had nothing to do with healthcare. Our clients were more Tribune, Clear Channel, media companies. But after doing that for about a year, I ended up being led to a large agency called MSNL. They were right next to the Letterman Building in Times Square in New York. And while I was there on the interview, the manager, who ended up being my direct boss, had asked me, "How do you feel about working in oncology and neurology?" And I had no clue what those words even meant. Neurology, I knew a little because my great grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and that was the area of business for a pharma company that they needed help with communications for. But oncology, no clue. And I just remember Googling after the interview, like, what actually is this? But too afraid to actually ask in the interview, what is it? And why can't we just use cancer instead of oncology? But so I was just led to take that opportunity. It seemed like a really great agency and great team. But as I was getting more up to speed on the landscape for cancer, particularly as well as Alzheimer's, I really felt this pull towards something greater than myself. Before that, it was all around move to New York, make money, pay off the student loans. It was very, self-centric. But as I was getting into some of the work that I did for MSNL for these two clients, Roche and Pfizer, I really started to notice that I could, as a communications person, be a conduit to very important activities such as storytelling with people who had serious medical conditions. And one of those medical conditions that I really remember fondly was for breast cancer and colorectal cancer, having the responsibility of working with people who had, stage 4, who their only goal at that point in their life was to just make sure people knew to get screened, get the help they needed, especially in the case of colorectal cancer, to know that it's not a man's disease, as one person who had colorectal cancer, I remember she shared. And that was huge. I was 22, 23, just looking to make a buck, but then hearing stories of such inspirational people who literally relied on myself and others on my team to just get the story out, spread the word around disease awareness and treatment, was so powerful. And so that's really the I think the turning point for me, where I figured, you know what, nutrition wasn't for me, but how awesome it is that I can marry, public relations and healthcare to do something that's greater than myself for the world.
I love that. It's really great to hear that backstory and to know that something was sparked in you in that way. Probably in sort of a surprising way, too, that you maybe would not have anticipated feeling that way or being moved in that way. But I'm also sure it's impossible not to be moved when you're dealing with people who are facing such serious circumstances. So you've now been working in the pharma industry for the past 20 years, and you've really had a lot of experience pertaining to this need for compassion and empathy in regard to that patient experience, as you explained. So can you tell us more about how you've navigated that need for compassion and empathy in your own roles as time has gone on, and how you work to encourage others to better understand that need as well?
Yeah, I think front and center, it's remembering why you're doing what you're doing. Communications for pharma could be very intense. Depending on what we're working on, it could be you're announcing an FDA approval, which we call the Super Bowl of what we do. It's like all hands on deck, you're on. I remember going to a medical meeting, handling not so good data results and needing to communicate those for a client. And it was in Germany, and I worked a good 23-hour day. And I did have that 1 hour sleep, and that was like the best hour sleep in my life that I got. So it can get a little intense in our world, although we always say we're not surgeons. We certainly are. I think Forbes at one point ranked it was like surgeons and then communications PR people as like the top stressful jobs, in the world. And definitely you experience that in healthcare. But I think for me, it's always remembering why we're here. And as I mentioned before, it's that privilege that we have to be able to share information that truly is impactful for, people in our families, people that we have the privilege to touch. Going back to the example around the colorectal cancer patient storytelling series that we did, I remember one woman, Rose. She's in San Diego, and she and I used to correspond all the time because at the time I hadn't gone to California, and she told me all about San Diego, and here I am from New Jersey living in New York. I'm like, I need a beach right now. I need to get to San Diego to meet this woman. So we would always talk about how great it would be if we met, and she would share recipes. She's Italian, so she would share her recipes, and I would share how I married an Italian. Back then, I was dating him, and then I needed help on my cooking skills. They weren't up to par. Fast forward 20 years, they're still not up to par. But we would talk about that all the time, and sometimes we would even forget kind of the purpose of our call, because it was more around just connecting on a human level versus talking about a disease or categorizing her life as a disease. And so it was heartbreaking because one day I had reached out and hadn't heard anything, and her husband had emailed me this very long email explaining what had happened. Rose had passed away, but that just our conversations, and for the split second that she could just focus on something else other than stage 4 colorectal cancer meant a lot to her, and it meant a lot to him. And so I should take him up. He did say open invitation to go to San Diego, meet the family, and just be connected to all of the great recipes and memories of Rose. And so I try to keep that alive in what I do and how I interact with people, knowing that this is serious and it is a responsibility, but like I said, a big privilege that communications folks have to be able to get education and awareness out. And so I think empathy inherently goes with that. If you know why you're doing this, it's for greater than yourself, but also greater than a job as well.
Absolutely. And there's so much power in having those personal experiences, I think, of just connecting with somebody in that way that can really motivate you differently in the work that you're doing. And I'm sure that you're now modeling that for others in your industry, which is great. It's the more people that can kind of show up in that empathetic way, the more that sort of catches on. And we need more of that. So in 2020, you began teaching at your alma mater, BU. Can you tell us more about how that came to be? What is it that you teach specifically, and what is the greatest value or takeaway for you when it comes to teaching?
Yeah, so I never saw myself as a teacher per se. I mean, you always teach on the job, and I absolutely loved, mentoring and advocating for folks that I worked with. But during COVID, there was an opportunity to adjunct for media strategies and management is the name of the course. And so I started doing that. It was the fall of 2020. I remember because I was so nervous, like, do we wear masks? Are the students going to be there? What do we do? And I just remember being the one asking all these questions on a Zoom call, and everyone kind of being like, don't worry, we've got this. Like, we have a whole protocol in place to keep you safe, keep the students safe, no worries. And it really is, I'll use the term that my mentor, Amy Chandler, who also teaches at BU, my fellow colleague had mentioned. She called it the wild, wild west. And she said that endearingly in terms of there's no corporate SOP, there's no box that you need to stay in. It really offered a great creative outlet to be able to take experience that we had on the job and be able to apply it in a way that we felt was most effective for students and the next generation of PR professionals. And so once I understood that really there's a lot of flexibility and leeway, because the goal is to put really talented people in places where they can provide a diverse learning experience for students, I decided that the biggest thing that they needed, I almost approached it like a client, like, okay, if these juniors and seniors are like my client, how would I approach it? And I know they all want, and they tell me they want internships, they want jobs, they want to know how to network that's not, socially awkward, all of those things. And so even though I taught media strategies, I also integrated a lot of career readiness into the classes that I had, and that was kind of my slant on teaching. And so after doing that for 2 years, the opportunity just this past fall came up to go full time as an associate professor. And again, part of me kind of felt like, is this real? Like, my GPA at BU. You know that I failed that biology class. It's all out there. You have my records. And it was just, again, another one of these, honorable, like privileged opportunities to be able to help support an industry that certainly, as I hear from other agency folks, in-house corporate folks, like how do we make sure that that next generation coming in is strong, is, confident, they have the right skills in terms of, client relations and interactivity, all of those things. How do we do that? And so I'm in a really nice intersection of, consulting, of teaching, mentoring, but also very much listening to, my former coworkers and clients of like, what do they want to see in that next generation coming up? What's going to make them feel compelled to hire, the students from BU? And how do I, bring my value to that?
It's fantastic that you were able to take all that experience. And I also love that you said kind of like a little bit of imposter syndrome of like, how do I qualify here? Right. Like, but what's exciting is that I feel like things are moving in the direction of when you have that real life experience, universities are seeing that as an extreme value to the student
Right.
population, and for all the reasons that you just mentioned, because you're able to say, okay, great, not only am I going to focus on what you're here to specifically learn, but I can also give you all this job readiness, that will really set them up well for the future. That's really exciting that you're able to marry those two things together. And you were nominated by a fellow colleague to become a founding member for a community called Chief, which is a private network for the most powerful women in leadership. Can you tell us a little bit more about Chief, and then also about how this nomination came to be and what inspired you to move forward with that opportunity?
Yeah, sure. That was another pleasant surprise. I was at my desk working at Takeda. This was pre-COVID, and the opportunity came up specifically to be what's called a founding member for Chief as they were opening their Boston location. So of course I'm like, well, what is Chief and what's going on? So I Google it, and I realized, oh, okay, so it's a C-suite and executive level community specifically trying to tackle gender parity. And so the goal of Chief is really to get more women in executive leadership positions and stay there to really try to combat that. And so it was a very brand new, out of New York organization. My old coworker from MSNL, actually, that first job that I was referring to for healthcare, Suzanne Jacobson, nominated me, and I had no clue. And so when I heard Suzanne nominated you for this, and again, I'm thinking, well, why me? Again, not that I'm not confident in my skills, but let's be clear, I'm not an executive or a C-suite woman. And so I had a interview with the experience team and just shared again what I'm doing. I think at the time I was on the board of PRSA Boston. I was probably just starting with my adjuncting at BU. I was involved in other things in the community, very much so a supporter of women and everyone, particularly in underrepresented groups, moving forward, and how do I contribute to that? And so I ended up getting selected to be this founding member a couple of years ago, and it's been a really great community so far. We've got 20,000 members across all of the offices, London, and I think now they're starting to open up outside of the EU and the US, and a 60,000 member wait list. And so I hear that and I say, oh my God, we need more chiefs. We need more organizations to really help women, get into positions of power and stay there because the demand is just so great.
Yeah, that's actually was going to be my next question, is that that's really wild that there's a
Yeah.
60,000 person waiting list. But it's not surprising, really, right? When we think about this lack of support or encouragement for women in leadership roles like that. So, could you maybe just tell us, how you think the importance is of moving in this direction where those 60,000 women can get the support? Why
Right.
is there such a great demand, and how can we kind of bridge that gap?
Well, I was reading, I'm always on LinkedIn reading all types of articles between like Forbes and Harvard Business Review. I'm such a groupie, but like there was a Forbes article in October, and they continue to share and reshare and do different perspectives on it, where we are in this whole notion of a great breakup, where women are breaking up with their corporate jobs faster in these last 5 years than ever before. And so we're at the height of that now, where especially contributing to that was COVID, and just this awakening of women feeling like, what do they want out of their careers? What's the right culture for them to make sure that they are going to feel empowered and good about where they're working, and how they're working and who they're working with. And so with this great breakup, I think there's certainly now a need for women to say, we need support, and, kind of stop with the, mean girls, the catty women thing that we all kind of have seen and experienced in the environment, and really focus on supporting each other. I've never been in any other organization or institution where I feel that women truly are wanting to support in any way possible. I never feel like there's this weirdness of like kind of who's better or if there's a competition. None of that. In fact, when I was really jumping into becoming a professor and starting my own business for consulting, I asked a lot of the chief women for, hey, do you have any tips or advice? Or, how do you even create an LLC? What's the best way to go about it? And I would say in a half an hour, I had three women, after I kind of put a call out on our, electronic bulletin board, a lawyer, so a business owner herself, and then someone from academia who also consults, saying, yep, like, let's just get on Zoom for 20 minutes. We'll help you. We'll figure this out together. And, they continue to check in to make sure that it wasn't just this, we're going to help you one day, but a continuous opportunity to really help me on my journey. And it's something that I'm certainly paying forward as well for other women.
It's really, there's so much power in community, especially when it comes to females. Exactly what you were just saying, because there has always been this, sort of culture of women kind of sort of, well, when you're vying for positions and there aren't that many, it
Right,
unfortunately creates this cattiness and this like, I'm going to step over you or on you to get to where I want to go because there's only enough room for so many of us.
right,
I'm personally so glad that that is starting to shift. But also, I think what has to go hand in hand with that is females building each other up and cheering each other on and saying, I want that for you just as much as I want that for myself. And
right,
let's make room for all of us,
right,
right? Instead of trying to one up each other to get to these few positions, let's work together to create more space for all of us. And there's an aspect of this conversation around women in leadership that you say has really been missed or overlooked along the way. And that's the fact that women of color have not necessarily felt a part of this movement of pushing for more women in leadership. So you're passionate about shedding light on that missing link. Can you tell us more about the importance of this conversation, and in particular, the importance of being sure that women of color are brought into that conversation?
Yeah, there's certainly this dichotomy happening where, I see on one hand, especially following the unrest and the murder of George Floyd, like this big emphasis on, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, belonging is also a part of that as well, DE&IB. Most companies have some sort of initiative. They might have even taken the opportunity to hire, an officer of DE&I. But yet across the board, as I'm speaking with folks at Chief, or just, in my journeys of being a PR consultant and teacher, you know, part of us are feeling a little left out. It's interesting, and something that I encourage people to do is when companies talk about, how great their DE&I efforts are and that they are focused on women. I always ask, I don't know if they'll share with you, but ask what their retention rates are for women of color in particular, because that's also a big phenomenon. Unfortunately, women are leaving, the fastest in 5 years, corporate America, but Black women in particular, and again, this was another Forbes series, are leaving even faster and are reporting that they're not getting help. They're not getting the mentorships and the sponsors that, other women particularly are getting. And so what we're seeing are women creating their own businesses kind of in a vacuum and just trying to figure it all out on their own, kind of feeling like the other camp. It's certainly something that I've experienced as an Iranian Black woman here, and others who I mentor and work with also experience that. There's even conversation on LinkedIn right now around, imposter syndrome and what that means. And I'll always remember my cousin kind of came to me and was like, "Oh, do you ever experience imposter syndrome?" And I didn't even know what that was. This was a few years ago. And I'm like, "What is that?" And she's like, "Well, just kind of feeling like you don't belong." And I would say chief was definitely something that at first I was questioning, like, why me? Because I'm not, a executive C-suite level member. But once I got in it and realized what value I could bring to the table for people, that certainly faded. But the conversation is around, and I hate generalizing, but to make it more clear, women are saying there's imposter syndrome, but women of color, particularly Black women, are saying imposter treatment, where we feel very much confident and qualified for the role. We have, what's called the receipts. We have the results to prove it, but yet we're being treated as if we're not. I remember when I first started adjuncting, even I had a friend who said, "Oh, this is like a real class. Like, is it not pass or fail?" And I've certainly had folks when I was on the corporate side, explain to me, "Wow, you speak really well. Like, oh, like that you present well." And I'm thinking, well, I have 20 years experience working with the top companies. I would hope at this point as a director, senior director, that I can speak well, with all due respect. So there's always this weird doubt that we get sometimes that people have about our experience, even what I'm doing now, like, "Oh, how did you get there? Oh, if you can do it, so can I." Almost feeling like, the accomplishments that we have, certainly there has to be another answer or another reason. It can't just be that we're really good for what we do. And so there's that in there as well. And so really my goal is to just focus on supporting all people, but in particular, people in underrepresented groups who perhaps haven't felt that opportunity to have a mentor or to have somebody, focus on bringing them up or to be able to, showcase them. A lot of clients that I have, thankfully, this is a really great time to be a consultant in healthcare or PR. There's a lot of need. And so anytime I feel that perhaps, I don't have the bandwidth to do it, but maybe I can pull in somebody else, or depending on their need, if it's something a little bit more in the realm of one of my friends in an underrepresented group, I'll pull them in, because I do think that level of advocacy and support is very much needed and not always given to people of color in particular.
I really appreciate you shedding light on that, because I think it's also it's just eye-opening from someone who has never been in that position and can't truly relate to or understand what you've experienced or what so many females of color are experiencing. It's so valuable to have that personal insight and for people to hear that, okay, you hear that. And then if you're in positions or in any sort of, capacity of your work, how can you step up and, help in that sense, or even just change your language, as you're saying, the way that people are speaking to you about it. Think about that, think about the things that you're saying or the assumptions that you're making that are absolutely unfair.
Right.
Check yourself in those things, but also be an advocate and be an ally and figure out how you can help with this situation. And I think it's
Yeah.
really inspirational that you are taking that path of mentorship and leadership and making sure that you're there to help support other women in that way. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about community, which we've been talking a lot about that and the power of that. And I think, as I said, you play a really special role in all of these areas. It's kind of nice to see how they've all come together for you, from just the PR experience, then to teaching, and now to the leadership, women's movement. And now how you're also finding a more specific way to target, people that are not treated fairly. And so compassion is also a topic that I like to talk about. And I think that really plays well into this part of our conversation. So Can you tell us what your own definition of compassion is, and then how it relates to all the work that you do in all aspects of your career?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, compassion really means grace, giving each other grace, giving ourselves grace. I find more and more, especially women, we don't give ourselves the same grace that we give others. We always have to feel like we've got to be on, we've got to be perfect, and, everything has to be flawless. Case in point, I never apologize for coming on Zoom 1 or 2 minutes late. That was another trend that we saw too. Women apologize. It's like, don't we're all busy and we're human. And if we need to take 2 seconds to get water, it is fine. We are not robots. And I don't expect anyone else to apologize for like a couple minutes, and I don't do it. And so I think just trying to, again, understand that we're all here just trying to do our best. The experiences for me in healthcare and life sciences communications had made me realize that someone is struggling with something, whether it's a health condition that they have themselves or a family member. I have a couple family members who I just saw, my in-laws, who are struggling with serious medical conditions. And so, just getting my father-in-law out of the house and to dinner and having a good day, that's a win. And for my sister-in-law, just having her get up and stay up, because she has so many intentions of wanting to go out with us or do things, but she just can't. That's something that stays with me, because I recognize that I can't be the only person whose family is dealing with this. And so I also try to meet people with empathy in that way of, they might be dealing with things, maybe it's a health condition or maybe it's something else. And so whatever it is, I think the more we just learn to give each other grace, the more that we can feel that empathy, shining through, and pay it forward. There's times where I don't always think that way, and certainly I need to be checked, but I think the more that you can just be intentional around, just stop before you have a negative thought, or before you get frustrated on anything, and realize, is this worth it? And is this the intent of this person? Perhaps not. So just, again, it's all around grace. And I do want to share with that whole notion of imposter syndrome and imposter treatment. I had written this down because I didn't want to forget. Her name is Elizabeth Leiba. She's the author of I'm Not Yelling, a Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. And she has an entire chapter on imposter treatment. So it is something that, she's really feeling like, she's coined this phrase. And for more information about it, for any listeners who are like, what is this? I haven't heard about it. Her book certainly can be a good resource.
That's great. I'm glad you shared that, because, again, it's just getting that insight from somebody who's personally experienced it to explain what that feels like for them, and how on the other end can you avoid that happening
Right.
for anybody else. So thank you so much. I love your definition of compassion too. I love hearing every single person's different response to compassion. And it really is different for everybody, all with the same common, core value of, we hear the word empathy a lot when we talk about compassion.
Right.
I love that you use the word grace. I use that a lot myself, especially in terms of talking about myself, giving ourselves grace. Like you said, showing up a couple minutes late. I don't know what that is or why, but females especially are just so quick to apologize.
Yeah.
It's like it's just this defense mechanism, knee-jerk reaction to say like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. You never want to be inconveniencing everyone.
Right.
Um, but I do think it's really important for us to stop doing that, to give ourselves grace, and to expect other people to give us grace too in those
Right.
moments. Like, you're almost just kind of setting the example of saying, you know what, I'm giving myself grace. I'm going to need you to give me grace, and I would give you grace too in these
Absolutely.
moments. It's really, I'm glad you brought that up, because I love that part of the conversation about compassion. So lastly, can you share with us any nonprofits that you would like to highlight, and the importance of supporting these organizations or causes, in your opinion?
Yeah, sure. So before I went to academia, I led a communications for a neuroscience group at Takeda that was very much focused on mental health. And so I would say, especially now with following COVID, and sometimes I wonder, are we still in COVID? The craziness that's going on right now. I think anything we can do to help support um, people who are focused on the mental health community more now than ever would be helpful. And so NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, is definitely an institution that I feel really strongly about. You could follow them on social media and help contribute to a lot of their initiatives that are all around the mental health community, including those from marginalized communities. And so making sure that everyone gets the resources and access to the help that they need in America. And I think that they do have some connections outside of the US as well.
I'm really glad that you mentioned mental health because that's it's not always a nonprofit that is brought up when we have these conversations. I actually just had a conversation with a woman yesterday. She runs a nonprofit where they basically connect people to service providers, mental health service providers, and the service provider. Right now, I think they work primarily with vets, um, but they connect with service providers that are willing to like give an hour of their time. It's called Give an Hour, actually, is the name of the
Oh,
organization. And her and I were talking about just that the mental health conversation. It's nice to know that people are acknowledging that mental health is an issue for everybody. It is good to pay attention to that and for all of us to accept that we should seek the help that we need for mental health. But to your point, it's really, really important that we pay attention to those who are marginalized and really pay attention to their need for mental health support, especially through the pandemic. There has just been, I think, whatever anybody came into the pandemic with mental health wise, it has been exacerbated, significantly. And
right,
now, in order to battle this mental health crisis, it really does take everybody showing up to the conversation to normalize it, to, connect to resources as you are. So thank you for bringing that up. And just to encourage people to seek the support they need and to not feel in any way ashamed for needing it. We all need support in our mental health space. So
right.
thank you so much for bringing that up. And I will be sure to link the nonprofit that you mentioned and their social handles in the show notes today. I really just want to thank you, Monique, for taking the time to share with us really a pretty incredible journey through your career that you've had so far. I'll say that my biggest takeaway from hearing your story is the courage, the bravery, and just the willingness to let your path change and grow and shift, and just kind of letting all these opportunities, even if you didn't feel necessarily, like it made sense at first, moving past that fear or moving past that, any self doubts and just continuing forward. And in doing that, you've been able to help a lot of people, from those in your PR community, those in your students, and now these women in your network that you're helping to empower. I just want to thank you for sharing all that because it's been really inspirational for me personally, and I'm sure that it will be to the listeners as well. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks again for having me, Christy. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that I'm able to help support folks. And as I always say, I'm too antsy. We South Jersey people need to be in all things. So this portfolio career has really helped me to be able to just add value and support where I can. So I'm very grateful for the opportunities. Thank you.